Hi guys. Today I'm going to be reading To Build a Fire by Jack London, but I wanted to give you a little bit of extra extra material. So I'm going to put in some clips from the film so that you can get a little bit more than just the story, okay? To Build a Fire by Jack London, modified by Donna DeSantis. The man walked down the trail on a cold, gray day. Pure white snow and ice covered the earth for as far as he could see. This was his first winter in Alaska. He was wearing heavy clothes and fur boots, but he still felt cold and uncomfortable. The man was on his way to a camp near Henderson Creek. His friends were already there. He expected to reach Henderson Creek by 6 o'clock that evening. It would be dark by then. His friends would have a fire and hot food ready for him. The dog walked behind the man. It was a big gray animal, half dog and half wolf. The dog did not like the extreme cold. It knew the weather was too cold to travel. Okay, so here's the man. He's been traveling for just a little while, and let's see.
He knew that at 50 below, spittle crackled on the snow. But this had crackled in the air. Undoubtedly it was colder than 50 below. How much colder, he did not know. But the temperature didn't matter. He was bound for the old claim on the left fork of Henderson Creek, where the boys were already. He'd be in camp by 6 o'clock. A bit after dark, it was true, but the boys would be there. A fire would be going, and a hot supper would be ready. The trail was faint. He was glad he was without a sled traveling light. In fact, he carried nothing but his lunch, wrapped in a handkerchief inside his shirt. It was the only way to keep the biscuits from freezing. He was surprised, however, at the cold. At the man's heels trotted a dog, a big native husky. The animal was depressed by the tremendous cold. It knew that it was no time for traveling. Its instinct told it a truer tale than was told to the man by the man's judgment. In reality, it was not merely colder than 50 below zero. It was colder than 60 below, than 70 below. It was 75 below zero. Since the freezing point is 32 above zero, it meant that 107 degrees of frost obtained. The dog did not know anything about thermometers. It had learned fire, knew that the man was a fire provider. So it wanted fire, or else to burrow under the snow and cuddle its warmth away from the air. This was Henderson Creek, and he knew that he was 10 miles from the Forks. He was making 4 miles an hour, and he calculated that he would arrive at the Forks at 12:30. The man held steadily on. He was not much given to thinking, and just then particularly had nothing to think about, save that he'd eat lunch at the Forks, and at 6 o'clock he'd be in camp with the boys. Once in a while, that thought reiterated itself that it was very cold, and that he had never experienced such cold. But rub as he would, the instant he stopped, his cheekbones went numb. The following instant, the end of his nose went numb. But it didn't matter. A bit painful, that was all.
The man continued to walk down the trail. He came to a frozen stream called Indian Creek. He began to walk on the snow-covered ice. It was a trail that would lead him straight to Henderson Creek and his friends. As he walked, he looked carefully at the ice in front of him. Once he stopped suddenly and then walked around a part of a frozen stream. He saw that an underground spring flowed under the ice at that spot. It made the ice thin. If he stepped there, he might break through the ice into a pool of water. To get his boots wet in such cold weather might kill him. His feet would turn to ice quickly. He could freeze to death.
And once, suspecting the stretch of creek in front of him, he compelled the dog to go on in front.
Pepper. Come on, Pepper. Come on. That's a boy. You come here. Come on. That's it. Go on. Go on. Go forward. Go on, Pepper. Go forward. Go forward now. Go. Go on. Go on, Pepper. Get going. Get going. Get going, you cursed mammal. Get going. Go on, Pepper. That's it.
The dog made quick efforts to lick the ice off its legs and paws. This was a matter of instinct. To permit the ice to remain would mean sore feet. It did not know this. It merely obeyed the mysterious prompting that arose from the deep crypts of its being. But the man knew, having achieved a judgment on it. He did not expose his fingers more than a minute, and was astonished at the swift numbness that smote him. It was certainly cold.
At about 12 o'clock, the man decided to stop to eat his lunch. He took off the glove on his right hand. He opened his jacket and shirt and pulled out his bread and meat. This took less than 20 seconds, yet his fingers began to freeze. He hit his hand against his leg several times until he felt a sharp pain. Then he quickly put his glove on his hand. He made a fire, beginning with small pieces of wood and adding larger ones. He sat on a snow-covered log and ate his lunch. He enjoyed the warm fire for a few minutes, then stood up and started walking on the frozen stream again.
This would delay him an hour, for he'd have to build a fire and dry out his footgear. This was imperative at this low temperature. He knew that much.
Numbskull! Numbskull!
Okay, so the man is angry because his foot got wet all the way up to the knee. Okay. He walked over to some small trees. They were covered with snow. In their branches were pieces of dry grass and wood left by floodwaters earlier in the year. He put several large pieces of wood on the snow under one of the trees on top of the wood. He put some grass and dry branches. He pulled off his gloves, took out his matches, and lighted the fire. He fed the young flames with more wood. As the fire grew stronger, he gave it larger pieces of wood. He worked slowly and carefully. At 60 degrees below zero, a man with wet feet must not fail in his first attempt to build a fire. While he was walking, his blood had kept all parts of his body warm. Now that he had stopped, cold was forcing his blood to withdraw deeper into his body. His wet feet had frozen. He could not feel his fingers. His nose was frozen too. The skin all over his body felt cold. Now, however, his fire was beginning to burn more strongly. He was safe. He sat under the tree and thought of the old men in Fairbanks. The old men had told him that no man should travel alone in the Yukon when the temperature is 60 degrees below zero. Yet here he was. He had had an accident. He was alone and he had saved himself. He had built a fire. Those old men were weak, he thought. A real man could travel alone. If a man stayed calm, he would be all right. The man's boots were covered with ice. The strings on his boots were hard as steel. He would have to cut them with his knife. He leaned back against the tree to take out his knife. Suddenly, without warning, a heavy mass of snow dropped down. His movement had shaken the young tree only a tiny bit, but it was enough to cause the branches of the tree to drop their heavy load. The man was shocked. He sat and looked at the place where the fire had been. The old men had been right, he thought. If he had another man with him, he would not be in any danger now. The other man could build the fire. Well, it was up to him to build the fire again. This time he must not fail.
Perhaps the old-timer on Sulphur Creek was right. If he'd only had a trailmate, he would have been in no danger now. The trailmate could have built the fire. Well, it was up to him to build the fire over again, and the second time, there must be no failure. Even if he succeeded, he would most likely lose some toes. His feet must be badly frozen by now, and there'd be some time before the second fire was ready. Such were his thoughts. But he did not sit and think them. He was busy all the time they were passing through his mind. He made a new foundation for the fire, this time in the open where no treacherous tree could blot it out. He knew the bark was there, though he could not feel it with his fingers. Try as he would, he could not clutch hold of it. And all the time in his consciousness was the knowledge that each instant his feet were freezing. This thought tended to put him in a panic, but he fought against it and kept calm.
He was beating his hands for a while. He can only just barely feel anything. but we skipped a little bit there.
The dead fingers could neither touch nor clutch. He was very careful. He drove the thought of his freezing feet and nose and cheeks out of his mind, devoting his whole soul to the matches. The old-timer on Sulphur Creek was right, he thought, after 50 below. A man should travel with a partner.
He couldn't feel it burning his skin because his skin was frozen. The man looked up. The dog was still watching him. The man got an idea. He would kill the dog and bury his hands inside its warm body. When the feeling came back to his fingers, he could build another fire. He called to the dog. The dog heard danger in the man's voice. It backed away. The man called again. This time the dog came closer. The man reached for his knife, but he had forgotten that he could not bend his fingers. He could not kill the dog because he could not hold his knife. The fear of death came over the man. He jumped up and began to run. The running began to make him feel better. Maybe running would make his feet warm. If he ran far enough, he would reach his friends at Henderson Creek. They would take care of him. It felt strange to run and not feel his feet when they hit the ground. He fell several times and decided to rest a while. As he lay in the snow, he noticed that he was not shaking. He could not feel his nose or fingers or feet. Yet he was quite warm and comfortable. He realized he was going to die. Well, he decided, he might as well take it like a man. There were worse ways to die. The man closed his eyes and floated into the most comfortable sleep he had ever known. The dog sat facing him, waiting. Finally, the dog moved closer to the man and caught the smell of death. The animal threw back its head. It let out a long, soft cry to the cold stars in the black sky, and then it turned and ran toward Henderson Creek, where it knew there was food and a fire.